How do you as a consumer protect yourself when it comes to the supplement industry?
Just because a supplement is plant-based or natural does not actually mean that it is safe.
A vitamin D of 35, just because it says normal on a lab test, doesn't necessarily mean it's optimal.
Iron only if you need iron. Vitamin A as beta carotene rather than retinol.
Test, do not guess. If you are deficient, please supplement. The dose should be calibrated to your level.
Magnesium is another one of the supplements that we recommend pretty frequently in clinic.
Supplements are at best the icing on the cake. They are never the actual cake. The cake is sleep, movement, nutrition, social connection, and stress management.
Welcome to MD Longevity Lab, where we're playing the long game. This is a podcast where science meets real life with expert insights, practical tips, and real-world tools to not only live longer, but live better. Our aim is to radically change the way medicine is practiced and enable individuals to age gracefully, maintaining health span and vitality well into their later years. We're your hosts, Dr. Nisha and Dr. Vikas Patel, physicians, partners in life, and parents balancing work, wellness, and everything in between. Let's dive in. If you walk down the supplement aisle at any pharmacy in America, you're looking at roughly a $60 billion industry built on hope, marketing, and almost no regulatory insight. The bottle says it supports immune health, it supports vitality, it says it optimizes longevity, and legally the manufacturer does not have to prove a single one of those claims before it goes on the shelf.
Yep. 3/4 of Americans take at least one supplement. Did you know that? It's crazy. Including, by the way, both of us, we take supplements. So today we're going to do something we've been getting asked about constantly. We are going to walk through the supplements people ask us most about in clinic. And we're going to tell you what the evidence actually says, tell you what we think is worth taking, what's worth skipping, and what is genuinely a complete waste of money. Quick disclaimer, none of this replaces the foundation.
This episode is kind of where we tell you the truth about what should be in your medicine cabinet. And honestly, people are usually a little surprised when they find out how little supplements we actually do use.
Yep. So welcome back to the MD Longevity Lab podcast. I'm Nisha.
And I'm Vikas Patel. We are going to get into this supplement list that we'll take ourselves, but let's set some ground rules as we typically do, because supplements are not actually medications. The rules around them are very different than what most people, I think, assume. And here's what we're actually going to cover today. We're going to start with the regulatory landscape about supplements, because you can't really interpret any of this without understanding how unregulated the supplement industry actually is. Then we're going to go through the supplements that people ask us most about, things like vitamin D, fish oil, omega-3s, creatine, including the brain health questions surrounding creatine. And we'll move into magnesium, methylated B vitamins, and the MTHFR gene conversation. We'll also cover multivitamins, CoQ10, Akkermansia, and probiotics. We'll probably touch a little bit about things like the green powders and AG1, and maybe close on a handful of others that typically do come up in conversation and things that we do and do not recommend.
When you were in residency and you learned about the MTHFR gene, what was the first thing that you thought of? I think that's going to get bleeped out. But to this day, every time I see that in writing, I chuckle a little bit.
I mean, that is what it stands for, right?
Anyway, but before we start, remember, supplements are the chandeliers in your house. They are not the foundational pillars, which are lift, move, fuel, sleep, connect, and find purpose. No supplement is going to fix a crappy foundation. We say that all the time to our patients. But once you've got the 6 pillars in place, supplements can certainly be a game changer.
All right, so let's dive into how these things are actually regulated.
All right. So, Vikas, give people the 30-second elevator pitch about how this industry actually works.
Okay, so basically in 1994, Congress passed something called the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, often shortened to DSHEA. And under that, supplements are regulated more like food than they are drugs. That means that in practice, a supplement company can basically put a product on the market without ever having to prove to any agency or the FDA that it's actually safe, that it's actually effective, or that what's actually listed on the bottle name is even what's in the bottle.
Yeah. Compare that to a prescription drug, which has to go through phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. Prescription meds have to demonstrate efficacy compared to placebo, and they have to demonstrate an acceptable safety profile. And only then can a prescription medication come to market under that FDA approval. So the supplement industry is the complete inverse of that. The FDA only steps in after a product has been linked to harm. And even then, it's reactive, it's not proactive. So you really have to be wary of the supplement industry.
Right. So the burden of proof is essentially flipped, right? The default assumption with a drug is prove it works. The default assumption with a supplement is the company says it works, and unless someone gets hurt, that's good enough.
Yeah, and the consequences of this shows up in studies that are actually pretty disturbing. There have been multiple investigations where researchers buy supplements off the shelf, they send them to independent labs and find that the active ingredient amount is wildly off from what the label actually says. Sometimes there's more, sometimes there's less, sometimes there's essentially nothing in the capsule of what it actually is advertised. Sometimes there's contaminants like heavy metals, undisclosed pharmaceuticals such as stimulants, even anabolic steroids in products that are marketed as completely natural.
My first experience with this was when I was doing my intern year in the Navy hospital in Bethesda. Like in the military, so many people, because they're supposed to make weight, they have to have their fitness tests. They'd be on these supplements, and there used to be one. I don't know if you remember Stackers. I don't know if you remember that.
Is that like
It's like
hydroxycut?
similar, but it had monster doses of stimulants in it. And I took care of this 22-year-old girl in the ICU who had a heart attack after taking a bunch of Stackers. I think it's called Stackers 10 or something. And basically at 22, she had a heart attack from it.
And then Stackers got pulled off the market,
Got pulled off the market.
just like ephedra,
Yes.
right? That was
Fen-phen.
hydroxycut.
Yep. So there was a famous attorney general investigation in New York about a decade ago where they tested store brand herbal supplements at a bunch of major retailers, and a huge percentage of them did not contain any actual DNA evidence of the herb that was on the label. They were essentially just all filler.
Yeah. So this brings us to a good point. How do you, as a consumer, protect yourself when it comes to the supplement industry? And this is the most important takeaway of this whole episode, honestly, because first off, if someone has a link in bio and they're non medical, remember they are incentivized to sell you a supplement, whether it's right for you or not. So resist the urge to buy supplements off of TikTok, off of Instagram, because there's a monetary incentive for these people. And we cannot do that in our industry. Just like when we prescribe a prescription medication, we cannot get a kickback from the pharmaceutical company. In the same way, these supplements should kind of be handled the same way, but they're not. Supplement recs should be objective, much like the prescription medications. Supplements are nuanced, and not everyone needs the same supplement stack or the same dose. Secondly, look for third-party verification of these supplements. There are 3 certifications that genuinely mean something. The first is USP certified, which stands for United States Pharmacopoeia. The second is NSF certified, and that's a more rigorous version. And the third is called Consumer Lab, which is more of a testing service than a certification, but it's still pretty useful.
Exactly. So if the bottle of your supplement has one of those labels, either USP, NSF, which basically is more rigorous and is certified for a sports foundation, and it screens for all the banned substances. If it has those marks, then you can be pretty reasonably confident that what's in the bottle is actually what's on the label. If it does not have those marks, it's the Wild West, and you just have to trust that this company is operating in your best interest. One more thing on this: just because a supplement is plant-based or natural does not actually mean that it is safe. Hemlock is natural, so is arsenic. Some of the most dangerous things that humans have ever encountered are natural, and many supplements interact with prescription medications. St. John's wort interacts with pretty much everything. Grapefruit, even though it's technically a fruit, is not a supplement, blocks an important enzyme pathway in our liver. So please tell your doctor if you are taking any supplements, especially in the ER where I work shifts. You'd be amazed how often a patient is in the middle of a workup and we discover that they're taking 8 things from a supplement aisle that they never really thought to mention to us because, in their words, it's just a vitamin. It's natural. Look, when I started training, you never saw turmeric on hepatology consult. Now the NIH's Liver Injury Network has 10 documented cases, and most of them are from just the last few years regarding turmeric. 15 million Americans are taking these botanicals every month.
All right. So with all of this as a backdrop, let's get into the actual list of supplements. We're going to go in order from the supplements with the strongest evidence to the ones with the weakest evidence, and try and give you guys a clear take on each one. All right, let's start.
We'll start with vitamin D. So vitamin D is technically not even a vitamin. It functions more like a hormone in our body, and it's used in honestly hundreds of different metabolic processes in our body. Our skin, when it's exposed to UVB radiation from sunlight, it then activates vitamin D through the liver and the kidneys. And the problem is that the modern lifestyle has essentially decoupled us from sunlight. We largely work indoors, we wear sun protection, we live in latitudes that our ancestors never lived in. If you live in Chicago like we do, between October and April, the angle of the sun is so oblique that even on a sunny day, you're essentially making 0 vitamin D from sun exposure. Your skin just cannot do the conversion at that angle, and it's cold enough that you're pretty covered up. You need to have at least 50% of your body exposed to sunlight to even be able to have enough exposure to do the conversion.
So the prevalence of vitamin D deficiency or insufficiency, depending on how you define it, is somewhere between 30 and 50% of the US population, about half. It is higher in people with darker skin, higher in older adults because skin gets less efficient at making vitamin D as you age, and higher in people who are obese because vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin and gets sequestered in adipose tissue.
Now, what does the actual evidence say about supplementation? The big study here is called VITAL, the vitamin D and omega-3 trial. Roughly 26,000 participants. They were randomized to either 2,000 international units of vitamin D per day or omega-3s or both or placebo. And basically the headline result here for vitamin D on the primary outcomes of cancer and cardiovascular disease was, let's be honest, a bit underwhelming. It did not significantly reduce overall cancer incidence or major cardiovascular events.
But there was a strong signal for reduction in cancer mortality, especially when they excluded the first year or 2 follow-up. There was a 20% reduction in incidence of autoimmune disease, which is a huge clinical signal. And the absolute risk reduction matters here. So the Harvard team that ran this trial pointed out that on a population level, autoimmune disease incidence dropped from about 12 cases per 1,000 to 9.5 per 1,000. So in absolute terms, you have to treat hundreds of people for years and years to prevent 1 case.
Right. But for an autoimmune disease, that is still pretty meaningful. Autoimmune diseases are brutal. If you can move the needle on rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, psoriatic arthritis, polymyalgia, with a cheap, well-tolerated, low side effect supplement, then that's pretty much a win.
Yeah, I've got ankylosing spondylitis, which is an autoimmune disease of the large joints. And I'd be lying if I said I was compliant with taking my vitamin D every day. I know it's important, but I would say I remember a couple times a week.
Sometimes.
Right.
So in our clinic, we do test for vitamin D on essentially every patient. And if we find that their 25 hydroxy vitamin D level is below 30, which is the Endocrine Society, which they define as deficient or insufficient, we do recommend supplementation to get them back into the 40 to 60 range. For most adults, somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 international unit per day of D3 when taken with a fatty meal, because it's fat soluble, will get you into that optimal range.
Yeah. And remember, normal is not the same as optimal. A vitamin D of 35, just because it says normal on a lab test, doesn't necessarily mean it's optimal. So even our patients, most of us live in Chicago. Occasionally we have patients that come in from out of town. We just had a few last week and they were a total hoot. You guys know who you are. But we really recommend supplementing with vitamin D to get into that optimal range. I usually like to see it above 50.
All right. We should also mention that vitamin K2 is often paired with vitamin D3. There's some thinking, and though the evidence is a little bit mixed, that K2 helps to direct calcium to bone rather than to soft tissue, uh, like, for instance, the arteries. A lot of high quality D3 products now come bundled with K2. We think it's reasonable to take those together, especially if you have any cardiovascular risk profile. But the evidence specifically for K2 isn't as strong as it is for D3.
Bottom line on vitamin D, test, do not guess. If you are deficient, please supplement. The dose should be calibrated to your level, and you should be rechecking your vitamin D levels in 3 to 4 months to make sure that you are in optimal range. Do not just take a mega dose forever. We've seen patients with vitamin D toxicity from doing 50,000 international units a week for 3 years without ever rechecking, and that can cause increased calcium levels and even kidney stones.
All right, let's move on to fish oils and omega 3s.
All right. Speaking of a vital trial, omega 3s were the other arm of that study. So while we are here, let's talk about fish oil, which is one of the most popular supplements in the country.
Yeah, so omega 3s that we care about are EPA and DHA. They are long chain fatty acids found primarily in cold water fatty fish. So your salmons, mackerel, sardines, anchovies. Your body can't make these efficiently from plant precursors. The conversion from ALA, which is the plant form found in things like flax or chia, to EPA and especially DHA is extremely inefficient in humans, on the order of like 5 to 10% for EPA and even less than that for DHA.
So the question is, do supplements work? Vital, again, is instructive. The dose was about 840 milligrams per day of combined EPA and DHA. The primary cardiovascular composite outcome did not reach significance, but, and this is a big but, there was a significant reduction in myocardial infarction specifically, about 28% reduction in heart attacks, even though the broader composite didn't move the needle.
And there's a separate trial called Reduce It that used a much higher dose, 4 grams a day of basically a purified prescription form of EPA in patients who already had high triglycerides on top of statin therapy. That trial showed a really meaningful reduction in major adverse cardiovascular events. So at high doses in high risk patients, the effect is actually real.
Yeah, the challenge with over the counter fish oil is that the doses are usually much lower than what's actually studied in the trials. And most cheap fish oil capsules contain 300 milligrams of or less of combined EPA and DHA. So if a label says 1,000 milligrams of fish oil per capsule, look at the EPA and DHA specifically, the breakdown, not just the total. You may need to take 3 or 4 capsules just to get a meaningful dose, but make sure you talk to your doctor about this too.
Exactly. And quality matters enormously with fish oil because it can actually go rancid. Oxidized fish oil is essentially worthless and may even be harmful to you. There have been independent tests showing that a significant percentage of fish oil products on the market are actually oxidized. So you can look for the IFOS certification, which is the International Fish Oil Standards Program, or look for products that publish a third-party certificate of analysis showing that there's low levels of peroxide or anisidine values.
And one more practical tip, fish oil should not give you fishy burps. If it does, the oil is probably oxidized or the capsule is not enteric-coated, which means it's not prepared for the gut, or you're taking it on an empty stomach. So make sure you're taking the fish oil with a meal. If you're still getting reflux, try a different product, or honestly, just eat fatty fish 2 or 3 times a week, which is the actual epidemiologic evidence which supports cardiovascular health most strongly.
Our take, we think omega-3 supplementation is reasonable, especially for people who do not eat fish regularly, but we don't think it is essential if you eat a Mediterranean-style diet with regular fatty fish intake. For someone with well-established cardiovascular disease, especially with elevated triglycerides, it is definitely worth a conversation with your cardiologist about prescription strength EPA. For everyone else, eat fish first.
Yep. But if you have cardiovascular disease, that's even more of a reason to get your pillars in order because a fish oil is not going to save you. All right, so let's move on to our next supplement, which is creatine. And we're going to touch on that brain health question too. So let's talk about creatine because this one has had a real renaissance in moment in the last few years. For decades, creatine was thought of more of a supplement just for guys at the gym trying to get bigger. Oh my God, you're so lame. I remember like when dudes were teenagers, it's like that's when they wanted to load up on creatine. And now suddenly it's being marketed for cognition, perimenopause, healthy aging, for women, men, older adults, pretty much everyone.
Let us separate what we know from what we hope is true. The strongest, most replicated evidence for creatine is for muscle strength. If you do resistance train and you take creatine monohydrate, you will gain more lean mass and more strength than if you do the same training without creatine. That is one of the most reliable findings in all of sports nutrition. Hundreds of studies, literally, I think the last time I checked, there was like over 36,000 studies on creatine. It is a consistent effect. It's totally safe at the standard doses. It's very cheap. Creatine monohydrate is one of the few supplements that has earned the right to be called evidence-based without any qualifiers.
But remember, creatine is not going to lift the weights for you. You cannot just take creatine and expect to put on muscle. Your muscle has to have the stimulus, which is lifting heavy crap. So if you're taking creatine, expecting good health without that foundation that we keep harping on, it's not going to work. All right. And for our patient population, that matters way more than people realize. Sarcopenia, which we've mentioned before, is the loss of muscle mass with aging. And it's one of the strongest predictors of frailty, falls, and all-cause mortality in adults. Anything that helps you build and preserve muscle is genuinely a longevity intervention. So for people over 50, especially women going into and through menopause, when muscle loss is accelerated, creatine plus your resistance training is one of the highest yield combinations we can recommend. Again, I am not very good with taking supplements every single day, but I kind of feel like if I cover it 3 days a week, I'm good. No, you're like, just take it every day. I've never been.
Or don't.
Yeah, but I've never been good about taking something every day.
Yeah, well, then don't take it.
I don't know. I feel like it does something.
Psychologically.
Yeah,
Okay.
placebo.
The dose for muscle for creatine is really well established. It's 5 grams a day. a smaller person, a teenager, woman could get away with 3 to 4 or 5 grams. If you're larger, 6'2", 230 pounds, you may need 6 to 8 grams. No loading phase is needed. It can be taken any time of the day. You don't need any of the fancy buffered creatines or creatine HCl or any of the other marketed alternatives. They're just a little bit more expensive without any other true benefit. Creatine monohydrate is the cheapest and most studied, and nothing has been shown to be clearly better than that. It does not affect your kidney function, though it may increase your creatinine on your labs, and your doctor can order a cystatin C instead to track your kidney function instead of the basic creatinine. Basically, cystatin C is not affected at all by your creatine intake, and most people who are on creatine will have a completely normal cystatin C to calculate their glomerular filtration rate, which is how we measure your kidney function.
All right. Now, let's talk about the part that you wanted to address, which is the brain health claim with creatine. And here, let's be careful because the marketing has gotten way ahead of the data.
Yeah, so the mechanistic story here is kind of interesting. The brain uses a ton of energy. Creatine is part of the cellular energy system that helps to regenerate ATP from ADP. That is the conversion basically that allows our muscles to do work. We use one phosphate group from ATP when we do work, and it turns into ADP, and then we have to regenerate the adenosine triphosphate. And creatine lends that phosphate group to our muscles, which is why when you're lifting weights, getting that last 1 or 2 reps when you're already fatigued, that's where the creatine comes in handy, and it allows you to finish sets. So in theory, more creatine in the brain would mean that there's more energy buffer for cognitive tasks. And we know from magnetic resonance spectroscopy studies that supplementation can modestly increase brain creatine levels, although the increase is much smaller than what you see in muscle, on the order of 5 to 10% rather than the 20 to 40% in muscle tissue.
And there's a recent meta-analysis that pooled studies on creatine and memory in healthy individuals. The overall effect of creatine on memory was small, but statistically significant. When you broke it down by age, the effect in older adults, 60 to 76-year-olds, was meaningfully larger than in younger adults. So there is some signal there, especially in older brain.
There's also a study from 2024 that got a lot of attention. They gave young, healthy participants a single, very high dose, about 0.35 grams per kilogram, which for a 70-kilogram person is roughly 24 grams in one shot, and tested them under sleep deprivation. They saw improved cognitive performance and changes in brain phosphate metabolism. It was an interesting study, but it was 15 people, a single dose in a sleep-deprived condition. That hypothesis is generating hope, but it's not really practice-changing.
Yeah, where the evidence is strongest for cognitive benefit is in the conditions of metabolic stress. Sleep deprivation, hypoxia, which is lack of oxygen, mental fatigue, traumatic brain injury, and possibly aging itself. In well-rested, well-fed, healthy young people who eat meat regularly, the cognitive effect is small to non-existent.
And higher dose hypothesis, which is what the longevity influencer crowd, and the higher dose hypothesis, which is what the longevity influencer crowd is pushing, is the idea that if you take 10 to 20 grams a day for the brain effects, it's still honestly mechanistic speculation. I'm not going to name names, but there are some very popular influencers that actually have PhD behind their name that are pushing this. But I don't know that there's really enough evidence out there to really recommend this for everyone. There is that one fairly well done trial showing that 20 grams a day for 4 weeks raised brain creatine by about 9%, but there are no high quality, long duration randomized trials showing that sustained higher dose creatine actually improves real world cognitive outcomes in healthy people. The studies that exist are short, small, and use really kind of heterogeneous endpoints.
I think a lot of those influencers have tunnel vision, and sometimes the loudest voices aren't always the right ones. Like they just want to have something groundbreaking to hang on to with very little meaningful research behind it. And I think it's just noise. Most of the people listening are very confused with all of the voices from different ends. And so, we tell our patients take 5 milligrams of creatine. Well, I heard this influencer is saying 20 milligrams, and we are looking at that whole patient, right? Their kidneys, the whole body. Like there is no need to take 20 milligrams of creatine.
Grams.
Grams. Yeah.
Apart from that, it makes people popular to take claims, right? And these are things that can't be disproven. So you can make the claim that, oh, there's this study that showed this, but it's very hard to generalize from 15 people what happens on a population level. And no one is going to be able to do a study that will disprove what that influencer is claiming easily. It takes a lot of time to design proper studies.
All right. So, our take on creatine for muscle and strength, especially over the age of 40, this is one of the best supplements that you can take. 5 grams a day of plain creatine monohydrate, period. You don't need anything fancy. For brain health specifically, the evidence is genuinely promising in certain populations. Vegetarians who tend to have a lower baseline creatine may see meaningful benefits. Older adults with cognitive complaints may also benefit, and people who are chronically sleep deprived, it's worth a try. But for the average healthy meat eating 35-year-old who sleeps well, the brain benefits are probably marginal. But if you want to put in some muscle gains, I'd say there's nothing to lose.
Yes, creatine is naturally found in meat much more so than in plants, which is why people who are vegetarian and exercising regularly generally benefit quite a bit more from creatine than meat eaters. And the question on high dose, until we see better long-term randomized data, we aren't really recommending the 10 or 20 gram per day to our patients. The downside is mostly cost and GI upset, which is real at those higher doses. It does cause gas, flatulence, cramping. Honestly, the brain story is interesting. The evidence is suggestive. And in the next 5 years of research, we'll probably have a lot more data there. But for right now, 5 grams a day is well established and safe. And past that, you're just participating in an experiment.
All right, so let's move on to magnesium.
Magnesium is another one of the supplements that we recommend pretty frequently in clinic. There are a few reasons. First, dietary intake of magnesium has dropped substantially over the last 50 years because of changes in soil quality, food processing, and our eating patterns. Roughly half of Americans don't actually meet the recommended dietary allowance for magnesium.
Yep, magnesium is involved in over 300 enzymatic reactions in our body. It is essential for muscle function, nerve function, blood sugar regulation, blood pressure regulation, bone formation. It's super important for sleep and the regulation of the GABA system, which is one of the major calming neurotransmitter systems in the brain.
There is a meta-analysis published in 2025 of 38 randomized controlled trials looking at magnesium supplementation and blood pressure. The median dose was about 365 milligrams per day of elemental magnesium. The pooled results showed a reduction of about 2.8 millimeters of mercury in systolic blood pressure and about 1 point in diastolic. In hypertensive patients on medication, the effect was actually larger, almost 8 millimeters of reduction in systolic blood pressure.
Yep. And that's not a huge effect on its own, but stack it with other lifestyle interventions like exercise and proper nutrition, and it adds up. And remember, even small reductions in blood pressure at the population level translate to meaningful reductions in stroke and heart attack reduction.
The form of magnesium does matter. Magnesium oxide, which is the cheapest form and what is in a lot of bargain supplements, has very poor bioavailability. it is mostly going to give you loose stool and not much else. In fact, we use it in ER for people who are constipated to make them have a blowout.
I know. So I went to Costco the other day and it just says magnesium. It'll say oxide, citrate, and glycinate in like very small words. And I'm thinking all three of these do very different things. Like you're either going to be running to the bathroom, having to take a massive, I shouldn't say that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Or you're going to be really awake and alert. Like those two reactions are so different. And you see people kind of holding both bottles, and it doesn't really say on the label what each of them do. So if an unassuming consumer is reading it and thinking, I'm just going to pick up some magnesium, they may be running to the bathroom instead of being focused or having better sleep.
Sleep.
Yeah.
Not
Well, magnesium threonate.
it can cause a little bit of that. So the better forms of magnesium for absorption are magnesium glycinate, which is very well tolerated and good for sleep. Magnesium citrate, which is also absorbed but tends to be more of a laxative. And then magnesium L-threonate, which has been marketed for brain health based on some animal data and a small trial showing that it crosses the blood-brain barrier a little bit more efficiently.
Yep. On magnesium L-threonate specifically, the marketing is way ahead of the data. There's one published human trial showing that there's some cognitive benefit. It's a pretty small study, and the company that funds the research also makes the patented form. So just be aware of that. We do not think magnesium L-threonate is harmful. We just don't think that the evidence justifies the price of the premium yet. It might down the road, but we haven't figured it out.
So for most of our patients, we recommend magnesium glycinate, 200 to 400 milligrams of elemental magnesium taken in the evening. Typically, sleep quality improves for many people, and you can also get the metabolic benefits as well. If someone is constipated, magnesium citrate kills two birds with one stone.
Yep. Cautions though, if you have advanced kidney disease, you need to be careful with magnesium because it is cleared by your kidneys. Otherwise, it's one of the safer supplements out there. But make sure you tell your doctor that you're taking it.
Okay, so let's move on to the B vitamins and the methylation question. This is a topic where the truth is a lot more nuanced than the wellness marketing makes it sound.
Yep. So the basic story that you're going to hear on social media is something like this. About 40% of the population has that genetic variant in the MTHFR gene, the gene that prevents them from properly using regular folic acid and B12. Therefore, everyone needs to take a methylated form of B vitamin, methylfolate, methylcobalamin, to actually absorb their B vitamins. And without methylation support, you're setting yourself up for cardiovascular disease, depression, fertility problems, and cancer. So that's what you're going to hear on social media.
And almost every part of that story is either oversimplified or misleading. Let's kind of unpack it. The MTHFR is a real gene. It codes for an enzyme involved in folate metabolism. There are common variants, the most studied being the C677T. People who are homozygous for that variant do have somewhat reduced enzyme activity, but the clinical relevance for the average person eating a varied diet is pretty minimal. The main hard endpoint that homocysteine, the metabolite that builds up when methylation is impaired, is associated with cardiovascular risk. And here's a kicker. Multiple large randomized trials have lowered homocysteine with B vitamin supplementation and found no huge reduction in cardiovascular events.
Yep. So the surrogate marker moved, but the actual outcome didn't.
Right. And the leap from you have the MTHFR variant to therefore you must take methylated B vitamins is mostly being driven by direct-to-consumer genetic testing companies and supplement brands that benefit financially from selling the more expensive methylated form. The actual data showing methylated B vitamins outperform regular folic acid in the general population is kind of weak.
Yeah, I think that brings up a good point. If you are doing some online tests for genetics, and that same company that's offering you the test is then saying, well, perfect. We tested you for this. And now we sell the exact supplement that you need to fix this. You should be skeptical, right? So I think that's where the conflict of interest is very dangerous for consumers because you have these direct to consumer companies that are set up to kind of fill a gap because we know healthcare is kind of imploding. And so this puts susceptible patients that are kind of unassuming in this position like, okay, I have to spend thousands of dollars on this test. And now I have to spend hundreds of dollars on a supplement that I can only get for this company from this company. And that's just not the case. All right. So now where B vitamin supplementation does matter clinically, B12 deficiency is real and it's common, especially in older adults, because the gastric acid production decreases with our age, and you need acid to liberate B12 from food. And in vegetarians, especially vegans, because B12 comes almost exclusively from animal products. So, or in people on metformin long term and in people on chronic acid suppression, like PPIs, like omeprazole.
So folate is critical in pregnancy and preconception for preventing neural tube defects. And this is one of the most well-established uses of any supplement. 400 to 800 micrograms of folic acid daily for women of reproductive age is an actual public health win, fortified into bread products in the US since the late 90s.
All right. So beyond that, B vitamin supplementation in people without specific deficiency or risk factors does not appear to provide a clear benefit. So our take is don't take a B complex out of generalized worry about your health. Test if you're at risk for B12 deficiency, supplement if you're deficient, use the methylated forms if you know you have the MTHFR mutation and you have clinical symptoms. But the methylated forms are not magical, and most people will do just fine with regular forms in any decent multivitamin.
And just one warning, high dose B6 over long periods of time can actually cause a peripheral neuropathy. So those high potency stress B complex products that have 500% of the daily recommended value, you don't need to take those for years. You don't want to. There are case reports of irreversible nerve damage.
All right, so let's move on to our next vitamin, which is your daily multivitamin. This is a supplement that most adults are most likely to take. And the evidence on this one has shifted over the last few years. And I got to say, the number of times we have patients that come in like, oh, they're super healthy. They take their multivitamin every single day, as if that 1% chandelier is a foundation. Your multivitamin is not going to replace your foundation. So I got to throw that in there.
For decades, the official line, and ours, frankly, was that a daily multivitamin is just expensive urine. That was the thinking. If you eat a reasonable diet, you don't really need it. And the studies up till about 2015 generally supported that. The big trials like the Physicians' Health Study did not show meaningful reductions in heart disease or overall mortality with multivitamin use.
However, most recent data from the Cosmos trial has shown modest cognitive benefit in older adults taking a daily multivitamin. There's multiple analyses, including a sub-study that did detailed cognitive testing, which suggested a small but consistent slowing of age-related cognitive decline.
How much? About the equivalent of 2 years of cognitive aging slowed over a 3-year follow-up. That's not transformative, but it is detectable. The leading hypothesis is that older adults often have multiple subclinical micronutrient insufficiencies that a multivitamin does compensate for.
Yep. So our position is definitely softened a bit for someone in their 60s, 70s, or 80s, especially if their diet is variable. Taking a basic third-party verified multivitamin is completely reasonable. For a healthy 30-year-old eating a Mediterranean-style diet with plenty of vegetables, fruits, lean meats, you probably don't need a multivitamin. But bottom line, a multivitamin is not magic. But for older adults or people with restricted diets, it's cheap. It's a reasonable insurance policy.
If you do take one, look for these things. Iron only if you need iron. Most adult men and postmenopausal women do not need to supplement iron. Excess iron can be harmful. Vitamin A as beta carotene rather than retinol. Palmitate at high doses, especially for people who smoke, where high dose retinol was associated with an increased risk of lung cancer in older trials. And avoid those megadose formulations. The body can't use 10 times the daily value of most vitamins. And for the fat soluble ones like vitamin A, D, E, and K, megadosing can actually cause harm. Okay, let's move on to probiotics and Akkermansia. Akkermansia is one of the most interesting bacteria in the human gut microbiome. It is a mucin degrader, meaning it lives in the mucus layer that lines your gut and feeds on the mucus itself, which sounds counterintuitive, but actually helps to maintain that protective barrier.
Yep, people with metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and obesity tend to have lower levels of Akkermansia, and people with healthier metabolic profiles tend to have higher levels. So initially, the bacterium was thought to be impossible to commercialize because it has an anaerobic property and it dies in air, meaning any exposure to air or oxygen, it can't survive. But there are some Belgian researchers that figured out how to use a pasteurized form, which actually retains the metabolic benefits in animals and early human trials.
So now there's a fair amount of human data. Phase 2 trial published this year in Cell Metabolism in patients with type 2 diabetes who are overweight or obese showed that Akkermansia supplementation reduced BMI and lowered hemoglobin A1C, but, and this is important, only in patients who had low baseline Akkermansia levels. And people who already had healthy levels, supplementation did not really help. There are several other recent randomized controlled trials showing modest weight and metabolic benefits, particularly in the newer probiotic and postbiotic formulations.
Yep, the story is pretty promising. The European Food Safety Authority has authorized pasteurized Akkermansia as a novel food, and there's now commercial products available. But this is also one of the most actively evolving areas in supplement science, and we're still pretty early in the process.
Our take, we would not recommend Akkermansia broadly to healthy people for general longevity yet. The cost is pretty high, the evidence is still maturing, and the benefit appears to be concentrated in people with metabolic dysfunction. For patients with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes or unfavorable visceral adiposity, Akkermansia is something that we are actually starting to consider, especially given the new evidence about baseline level and of Akkermansia and the fact that it does actually lower patients' hemoglobin A1C.
And on probiotics in general, the yogurt aisle and the supplement aisle are full of products with billions of CFUs of various strains making crazy health claims. The evidence for general health probiotic supplementation in healthy adults is pretty weak. There's specific strains that have specific indications, but the idea that you should just take a probiotic every day for gut health is not well supported. You should eat fermented foods, fresh fruits, vegetables, fiber, and feed the bacteria you already have with natural foods.
Yeah, so the ones that are useful, Saccharomyces, that is actually useful if you're taking antibiotics because it does prevent antibiotic-related diarrhea, but not for use for just general purposes. Let's really briefly touch on the green powders and AG1 because I get a lot of questions about this. If you're busy and you don't eat enough vegetables, you want to drink a green powder in the morning just to get your baseline micronutrients, and you can afford it because they are expensive and the convenience is worth it to you, they're not going to hurt you. They're high quality products that have had third party testing.
Yep, but AG1 and these greens are not a longevity intervention. There's no real studies backing them up. It is basically an expensive multivitamin with adaptogens and superfoods that are mostly there for marketing rather than giving us clinically meaningful dosing. Eating your actual fruits and vegetables will give you higher quality nutrients in a food matrix with fiber, water, and thousands of phytochemicals, not just the powder. So those AG1s are a processed component. It is not the same as eating fresh fruits or veggies. Fresh fruits and veggies come first always.
All right, a few other things just worth mentioning because I think we are running a little long here. So let's just do a few quick takes. Iron, take it if you're deficient, which is common in women who are menstruating, vegetarians, and sometimes athletes, especially endurance athletes. Don't just take it because excess iron is harmful. Make sure you get a ferritin level.
Calcium, the story has gotten more nuanced. The old rack of 1,200 milligrams of calcium for bone health has been challenged by data suggesting that high dose calcium supplementation may increase your cardiovascular risk. So, these women that are in their 60s that wonder why they had low bone density, they are not doing resistance training. Just taking a calcium supplement is not alone going to be beneficial for your bones.
Zinc, it can be useful in short courses during upper respiratory viral infections where there is actually decent evidence that it shortens the duration of colds if taken within 24 hours of symptom onset. Long-term high-dose zinc supplementation can cause a copper deficiency, so do not take it indefinitely.
Ashwagandha, there's some reasonable evidence for stress and sleep, some signal for improvements in markers of strength and recovery in athletes. It's generally well tolerated. There's caveats around thyroid function where it can be helpful, but also hurt depending on the underlying issue. And there's possibly some interactions with sedatives.
Melatonin, we've talked about this one before. It can be useful at low doses, generally 0.3 to 1 milligram for jet lag or circadian rhythm disruption. There's a lot of high doses available on the market between 5 and 10 milligrams. That is way, way more than the physiologic doses and overall counterproductive. Melatonin is a hormone. It's not a vitamin. We should treat it that way. When you start taking these big doses, your body becomes dependent on it.
Resveratrol, everyone knows this one. Most of the longevity hype came from animal studies and a single famously controversial researcher. Can I name him?
Sure.
David Sinclair. The human evidence for life extension benefits is essentially non-existent, and this dude made beaucoup bucks on selling this supplement. We would not recommend taking the supplement.
Correct. A hot topic in longevity space is NMN, NAD precursors. There is true mechanistic data here that's real. However, the human data is preliminary and there just hasn't been a whole lot of good quality evidence to justify taking it. It has also been, for the most part, populated by David Sinclair.
Berberine, and this is sometimes marketed as nature's Ozempic, which is a wild oversell. There is some glycemic effect at 1,500 milligrams a day in divided doses, and it's useful in some patients with prediabetes, but there's some real GI side effects in many patients, and there's a ton of drug interactions with other medications that are metabolized through the liver. So make sure you talk to your physician prior to taking berberine or any other supplement for that matter.
Collagen, I think we hear a lot about this. You probably hear a lot about this from cosmetic patients as well. Lots of marketing, pretty modest evidence. There's some signal for skin and joint outcomes. The amino acids and collagen are also in any high quality protein source. So if you're eating enough protein and have adequate vitamin C, your body will make its collagen just fine. It's not a longevity essential. Lots of patients and people take whey protein, which is what we take, which is a complete amino acid source. And if you're taking that, there's no need to supplement with collagen.
All right. So we have covered a ton of ground. Let's bring it home with our actual supplement recommendations.
So this is what we tell our patients. Supplements that earn a routine recommendation for us are pretty short list. Vitamin D, omega-3s, magnesium, creatine. That's probably the ones that we are regularly recommending, correct?
Right. And this isn't just a blanket statement for every single patient. I mean, you're going through their medication list, their strength training, their nutrition. So if you guys are listening and just thinking like, okay, cool, they said creatine, vitamin D, I'm just going to order these. You can't just take a supplement blind. You have to talk to your doctor about how this interacts with medications, what you have to do in the lifestyle arena to really maximize the benefit without adding risk.
There's a couple others worth mentioning quickly. CoQ10 is often prescribed for muscle symptoms when patients are on statins, and there is some evidence for that. Curcumin is a pretty potent anti-inflammatory and can be used for chronic inflammation and joint pain in a bioavailable form. And then we did talk about iron. That's about it, right?
Yeah.
And all of these things are things that really there's a specific use that you got to talk to your doctor about whether this actually makes sense or not. The broader stuff that we talked about with our pillars is, I think, really the foundation.
Yeah. And that's the most important takeaway of this entire episode. Supplements are at best the icing on the cake. They are never the actual cake. The cake is sleep, movement, nutrition, social connection, and stress management. And if your foundation is broken, there's no supplement in the world that's going to fix it. If your foundation is solid, the right supplements can give you a small additional edge. And that's the real relationship.
Yeah, so practical tip, whatever supplements you do take, write them down. Make sure you let your providers know that these are the things that you're taking. Outside of that, please make sure that you're working on those pillars of health that we always harp on. And otherwise, thank you for listening to the MD Longevity Lab podcast. If you guys found this useful, please share it with one person that you know has a medicine cabinet full of supplements. Please subscribe to our Substack. Please leave us a review. Let us know if you have any questions. We do respond to our DMs.
All right, keep playing the long game, guys.
Thank you for playing the long game with MD Longevity Lab. You can visit us at www.mdlongevitylab.com to learn more about how we can support you on your journey. Stay connected with us on social media at MD Longevity Lab for tips, updates, and behind-the-scenes insights. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you subscribed, left us a rating, or shared it with someone you know who's also playing the long game. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.